How's it going, everybody? We've got a couple more minutes. I'm gonna let people come on in, and then we'll get started around 9:40. Okay, I just realized that I had my good mic unplugged. I hope maybe you heard some of that. We just got a couple minutes. I'm gonna let people filter in, and we'll get started shortly. So, how's everybody doing? Anybody do anything fun over the weekend? Over the long weekend?
I'm going to Nashville.
Hey, that's exciting. Just cuz or for something super special?
Just me and my brother and his friend are just going clubbing.
Cool. Okay, so I am going to get started even with a couple people making their way in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 3. I put up the agenda here a little bit ago. I've got a couple announcements. We're going to get perilously close to finishing chapter 12 today. Talking about the Aztecs, the Pueblo, North American native people. And then we'll turn to Europe and look at European exploration and kind of all of this leading to these cultures basically smashing into each other. But let's start with some announcements, and I'll flip this on over to our Bright Space page and some stuff I put up earlier. I'm still doing the Wellness Friday thing. I'm gonna keep trying to do it until I have run out of ideas, I guess. But I've had some positive feedback from a bunch of my classes, so I guess you like it. Jen is asking chapter 12. Yes, we're going to be perilously close to finishing chapter 12 today. So Wellness Friday, more stuff there from last week. Update from week 3. Just kind of reminding you what's due this week. Grading is moving along. I got the statement of understanding grades entered. If you by chance submitted it and didn't get credit for that, this extra credit assignment, let me know. I know I got some emailed assignments from people and I may not have remembered to include those. So let me know if I didn't add that. This week we've got our first discussion. Today we have our first discussion. I'm going to try to get that graded by the end of this week, but let me see what I can get done this week. Other possibly more important announcement, starting next week, next Friday, next Monday, September 13th, we're going to start adding a Monday lecture. So starting next week, we'll have lecture here on Zoom Mondays and Wednesdays. So again, 2 days a week, Mondays and Wednesdays starting next week. Same time, same Discord link, all that. We'll just be having a second day of lecture in an effort to help me get caught up on some content. Okay, questions about any of those announcements, changes, assignments, any of that? No. Cool. Let's see, was there something else I needed to talk about? I don't think so off the top of my head. I have a cat hanging out here. Who wants to see my cat? If he'll cooperate. This is Jefferson. Say hi. No? Meow? Okay. Give me 1 second. I think he needs to get out of this room. Give me one cat second. Okay, come on, you. Let's get out of here. Okay. So before we dive back into lecture, I do want to spend a little bit of time on the first discussion, because the point of that is to actually have this be a discussion of some kind. So you're welcome to pull up your assignment if you want to do that. I am going to be doing that. But I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on, not every single aspect and every single kind of nitty gritty point of this, but to kind of introduce what will be a theme this semester, which is the slave trade and the kind of divide between white and black in the American colonies and in the United States. So this first discussion kind of sets up the dynamic of what the slave trade is, and we'll sort of track it over the next couple of weeks. But let's jump into just some kind of off the cuff questions. I didn't expect you to answer these in your discussion, but it's really in an effort to pick apart the documents a little bit. So first off, let me just start with, what did you think of this assignment? These documents, I've used a couple of these documents before, a couple of them are brand new. And if your comment is it was really hard to understand, then I know that, and I can kind of modify this assignment a little bit. But what do you guys think of this from the get-go?
I think it was a lot of information trying to connect all four documents. I wouldn't say it was hard, but it was definitely a lot.
Okay.
I feel like that there were two kind of main questions, and I wasn't sure which one to answer.
Mhm.
There was a question in the discussion post that you made, and a question in the document section. Which one were we supposed to answer?
Ideally, the one from the discussion post, but if you answered both or either, I was looking over that last night and realized I needed to remove the question from the documents, and I didn't do that. So they are similar questions, or at least kind of circling the same idea. So my intent was the question in the discussion, the Brightspace post. If you answered both or just one of them, I'll kind of modify my grading accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Jen says, I enjoyed it. It was different from most readings I've read before. That's cool. Okay, well, let's jump into this. So we've got four, as I forget who said, 4 documents from 4 very different points of view, right? But they all kind of circle the same idea of the slave trade. with more or less involvement in that. But let's start with the first one. Olada Equiano. Who is this guy? What's some of the background about him that you got from the document, or there's like a little introduction before the document?
He was abducted as a child and sold into slavery in Africa. And then 6 to 7 months after, I think, his initial kidnapping, he was forced onto a slave ship and sold abroad.
Yeah. So this is a first-hand narrative of a person being captured into slavery and eventually enslaved. So some further background that I don't think is in the introduction to this. Equiano eventually purchases freedom, attends, I can't remember if it's like a formal college or just gets an education enough to publish his own autobiography, which is what this is from. But so he's captured, he's taken into slavery. Where are my notes here? What role does he seem to have in the slave trade? Again, this isn't a question I asked you, but I'm asking you now. So like, what kind of role does he have in this? Sometimes we might use the word agency, meaning like he's involved or not involved in what's happening to him. So how involved is he in getting captured or the slave trade as a whole?
I think he, like his personal account, because there's obviously the documents come from different points of view. His is very much from the people it affects. Obviously, it doesn't speak for every single person it affects, but because some people can't purchase their freedom, like his is a very unique story, like the background said, but it definitely comes from those affected by the slave trade and how it affects them.
Yeah, absolutely. He's the, to use the kind of crass terminology, he's the product, right? He's the thing getting bought and sold. But to dig a little deeper there, how in, I don't want to say this. Does he have an effect on what's happening to him, or is he just kind of sitting back and stuff is happening to him? Maybe I'm not making enough sense. I keep coming to this question of agency. Does he have agency? Is stuff just happening to him, or does he sort of participate or interact with people?
To
And
some degree, oh, sorry.
I was gonna say somebody other than Ethan. I like Ethan,
Okay.
but somebody else jump in here.
Did you mean like towards the end, like he found himself like on that ship, and like he was going to the Barbados or however you pronounce it? He kind of just went along with it.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Or
Yeah. I mean, you guys read the documents as well as me, so he's sort of experiencing all of this, right? He's not. Maybe a better question: does he fight back? Does he try to escape? Does he do any of that?
But when he was a slave to a few families when he still lived in Africa, like he didn't really have much control over where he was going to be, and he didn't have control over being kidnapped. But I feel like within the families that he was in when he was in Africa, like he said that he almost felt like he was being adopted to the families. So I don't think that he really wanted to try to revolt against that.
Yeah. I'm not sure who was talking just there.
Oh. It was Avery.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Avery. His concept of slavery from being in Africa is very different from European kind of flavors of slavery, right? That's a thing we'll come back to a little bit later in the semester. let's move to the next document. Thomas Phillips' voyage made on the Hannibal from London. So he is a slave trader, a purchaser, a person deeply involved in the industry itself. How does he, in kind of a middle section there, how does he describe buying and selling and evaluating African people? Like he talks about a slave ship coming to port and they're going to buy some slaves, and then sort of how they evaluate them. So how do they evaluate them?
I guess it was like they had like a surgeon come in and they like had like their best men come out first, and it was very just kind of inhumane. It was kind of like they were picking and choosing which ones they saw fit. And on top of that, when they did select the ones that they wanted, they would brand them, like put a permanent mark on them, which is all just very, again, inhumane.
Yeah, and in like the most literal sense, they're treating them not as human beings, right? Jen says they're being treated like products. They check their age, they check their teeth, right? Has anybody dealt with or raised livestock? Because this is very similar to that process. Um, I think in this document, doesn't Phillips talk about like you really need to be careful about checking their age? Somebody help me out there. I might be thinking of a different document.
I think you're thinking of the right one. Like he stresses that they make sure to check their age through their teeth and not through their appearance, because they do their best to make them look younger than they are.
Yeah. What struck me after reading this, and maybe some of you, was there was a point where I sort of pulled myself out of the document. I was like, oh my God, they're talking about people. They're not talking about like pigs or horses or cows or something. Again, kind of speaking to that dehumanizing, like really, truly, literally not treating them like human beings. Okay, so let's go to the third document, letter to King João of Portugal. Here we have a letter from a king in Africa to the king in Portugal. What does the author of this letter say is being taken from him or from them?
His people.
Yeah, his people, right? Lots and lots and lots of them. But then he goes on a little bit later to say, towards the end of the letter, he asks for something from the King of Portugal. What is he asking for? I mean, he might be asking for his people back, but he's a little more specific.
Wasn't that the one where he asked for medicine?
Yeah, and Jen in the chat is throwing this out there too. Doctors, clergy, pharmacists, or medicine, absolutely. Why is he? Let me be careful with my question. Why does he feel like he can ask for this?
That is
That is a tough one.
Can you ask again?
Why does he feel like he can ask for these things? He's asking for medicine, doctors. Why does he feel like he can ask for that?
To me, it seemed like he could ask that because he mentioned that they had converted to Christianity a lot and mentioned God a lot in his letter.
Yeah, we are the same religion as you. We are on friendly terms, probably. Again, I might be thinking of a different document, but I think he might have said that like we had an agreement that if we needed anything, we could ask you. So where's our medicine? Where's our doctors? So what does that say about the promises made by Portugal and like if they're keeping those promises? if I need to rephrase the question or it's confusing, tell me.
I mean, I was going to say that I don't think that Portugal is really keeping all of their promises. I mean, they came to help. I think it was the Congo, but it's different now. But then they started asserting their power over the Congo and undermining their authority, and then starting to enslave people and send them abroad. So I don't think they're really keeping to their initial promises after converting them.
Yeah. Saying, hey, we converted. We're best buds, right? You said you'd help us, but like we need some stuff. We need medicine. We need some basic care from you if we're supposed to be bros, right? Okay, so I don't want to spend like the bulk of our limited time here on this. So let me just jump to. I know we didn't cover the fourth document, but let me jump to the kind of question at hand, and bring up the question at hand. In light of these documents, who should or who could be held responsible for really kind of the beginning of the slave trade or the perpetuation of it? So this is kind of the question, the core question in the discussion. What do you think?
I don't think we can just blame one person. I think they all play a part, so they all get blamed. So even if it was for drugs, medicine, or straight out fear, they all play a part. And we as a reader also need to understand they were a big thing back then. So it's a span more out of these four documents.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Austin. Everybody. I can't remember if I said it in this class. I know I emphasized it in my world history class more, but everybody sucks and everybody's great when it comes to history. There's no kind of ideal society that does everything good or everything bad. Every part of human history has a role in something. Now, later we're going to talk about the kind of institutionalizing of slavery and the perpetuation of kind of racial differences. And there we might be able to put a little more blame on one group or the other. But that'll be a couple weeks from now. Okay, so that is kind of the format of our discussions moving forward. You do the discussion via Brightspace. We spend 10 or 15 minutes here talking about it. Really broadly, are there questions about this kind of assignment? What to be thinking about for the future assignments? Thoughts in general? Any of that? Criticisms? Gifts of money? Okay, silence means no. In all seriousness, though, if I'm kind of feeling my way around this new format of discussion. If you want to shoot me an email and say, hey, this was confusing, or this was hard, or you should have spent more time on whatever, please tell me that, because I will kind of alter and rejigger these sorts of assignments. Okay, so let's jump back into where we left off last week. If I remember correctly, we had we started talking about the Aztecs last week?
Yeah.
Yes. Did we talk about religion?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody help me very specifically. Where did we stop? What? Let me pull up my PowerPoint. Did we get to human sacrifice yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I get to act out being a human sacrifice?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Where my heart got ripped out and I was given as an offering to their
Every
sun
history
god.
class should start like that.
Yeah, right? Where your teacher gets their heart ripped out. So we probably stopped here. We didn't get to North America, Pueblos.
No, we didn't.
Okay. I'm only saying this because you're on my screen right now. Nelson, your hat's amazing. Okay, so we touched
Thank you,
on...
sir. Your bow tie's amazing.
Thank you. It's Ohio State, scarlet and gray. But okay, so we spent some time on the Aztecs and the kind of nature of religion, and really one of the biggest, to use a $5 word, as my grandpa would say, the schism between Europe and the Americas, the kind of reason why Europeans see the Aztecs as so different and threatening to an extent, is this practice of human sacrifice. But we touched on this idea of the cosmic mission as sort of their justification for needing to sacrifice to kill their own people. What was that cosmic mission? What was their cultural or religious reason behind killing their own people?
To give back to the god who I think he skinned himself to give to them.
Yes. So we had our buddy CP Totek. He is one of the gods who has human sacrifices made to him. Our sun god as well, Quetzalcoatl, would have human sacrifices made. But the idea is that we're appeasing them. We're making them happy so that they continue to, in the case of Quetzalcoatl, make the sun rise again. So it's this obligation that says, if we don't do this, if one of our own people doesn't basically volunteer to kill themselves, everybody's screwed. We're all going to die. So I think the analogy I used was to say, well, if I come to you next week and I say, okay, everybody gets an F in this class unless one of you kind of takes the hit and gets an F, then you all get A's. That's obviously not a perfect analogy, but it's the same kind of situation. To help the rest of the group, one of us has to sacrifice themselves. Okay, so really briefly, I want to touch on a couple of other native groups in the Americas, and then we're going to turn to Europe here. So in North America and the American West, we have dozens of different groups. The Pueblo, I will highlight here briefly. Their name comes from the Spanish word village, and really kind of describes what the society was like. It was more like a city-state model than a big, giant, huge empire like the Aztecs would have. So if we look at a map of North America, the Pueblo are down in this southwest, a little bit of kind of west Great Basin region, mostly in the southwest though. And there were this collection of kind of smaller isolated cities that sometimes interacted with each other, sometimes didn't. But we can classify them as one group, like the Aztecs, because they spoke the same language and they had a lot of the same religious beliefs. Notably, one of the more, to me, fascinating parts of the Pueblo history is the way they lived. When the society originally existed, probably around 1000 or so, they lived in these underground shelters, what we call pit houses. And if we jump ahead a couple slides here, this is a Pueblo pit house. It's a dwelling built underground with this kind of wooden roof section over top, so you could climb out of it and walk around or hunt or do whatever. And we don't really know where this originated, because this isn't normal for humans to do. Most human existence, if it becomes a settled community that's not nomadic, will build something above ground. But the Pueblo don't. They started as this kind of underground, almost subterranean society, and then move above ground. Sometime around 1200 or 1300, we start to see Pueblo communities building shelter above ground. So probably the most well-known example of this is Mesa Verde out in, I want to say Arizona. I might be wrong about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody. But Mesa Verde is this massive city. It might not be the size of kind of a modern day city. It would have housed about 125 residents, but was probably part of a much larger Pueblo community that was this sort of permanent settled community. Here's a kind of zoom in on some of the shelters. But one of the things to note is that kind of pit shelter, pit house tradition continued, or at least was kind of grafted onto this settlement. These round areas here, no, you can't see that. Round areas, not that. Wait for it. It'll be worth it. Round areas. Oh my God. I hate this computer. Okay, round areas here are probably the remnants of a pit house that then turned into something else. We know that the Pueblo referred to these as kivas, but we don't really know what they were. Maybe they were for some kind of religious purpose. Maybe they were shelter for food or storage for something important, but we don't really know. So we have very different kind of ununified society here with the Pueblo out west. If we move a little further east, over to here, we have the Cherokee in the American East. Here we have an even different, more different, or third flavor of a society. The Cherokee are part of the larger Iroquois group, meaning their language is similar to the Iroquois, but it's kind of not a dialect. It's in the same family of languages. So if you've studied language at all, Spanish and French are Romance languages because they have the same root kind of vocabulary. Similarly, the Cherokee and the Iroquois share some language similarities. But the Cherokee are different from the Pueblo, different from the Aztec to a certain extent, in that they've always had a centralized government. So going back to about 1000 CE, we see Cherokee settlements in parts of East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, parts of Kentucky, parts of Northern Alabama. And this is a pretty organized government or social structure from the outset. Each individual village amongst the Cherokee group had a council that kind of administered that village, decided laws and punishments and things like that. And then each individual village sent a member to a council of clans. So this kind of larger, almost like a national government or a federal government that made decisions on behalf of all of the Cherokee people. And so I have that bullet point there, national in quotation marks, because it's not exactly like what we think of as a national government. But at this kind of higher level, you have two chiefs, one dealing with matters related to peacetime, so that's the white chief, and matters related to times of war, that's the red chief. So you basically have two people in charge based on if the Cherokee are fighting a group or not fighting a group. So we have this whole kind of mixture of different types of societies, both social structure and the way that Native groups lived. And something we need to be aware of, especially later in this class, is that not every Native group interacted with Europeans or with the United States in the same way. Often they are working in their own individual interests or the interests of their people, or even down to like a village, might sign a treaty with the United States, but the rest of that society doesn't. So that's something we'll touch on a little bit later. But for right now, I want to turn to Europe and what is happening at roughly the same time. But before we dive into that, are there questions about the Pueblo or the Cherokee or any of what we covered with the Aztecs last time? No. Okay. So I've got a smattering of slides here that I'm going to breeze over. I'm not going to expect you to know anything about Cherokee religion, matrilineal society, this idea of freedom. We will touch on that, but not this particular slide. I lied. Let me touch on one thing here, and this will kind of introduce a theme over the next couple weeks. So, one of the big themes of this book is freedom and liberty and sort of rights as a human being. You know, the book title, "Give Me Liberty," is not just a fun title to get you to buy the book. It's the thesis of the book. Eric Foner is kind of arguing about what freedom is and how we've defined it over the course of American history. So let's take Native American kind of concepts of freedom and compare that to Europe. Native Americans tended to view freedom in the bigger context of what's best for the group. So you have your own freedom of choice as a member of, let's say, the Cherokee. But as soon as that freedom of choice butts up against the good of everybody else, then you don't have that freedom anymore. So, you know, I might, if I'm a member of the Cherokee tribe, I might have the freedom to go stab my neighbor in the throat, but, you know, that limits that person's freedom to exist as a living, breathing person. So I can't just go stab them in the throat, right? That kind of idea, when your freedoms come up against the better good of society, that's something we'll talk about a little bit later when we get to the Enlightenment. But so that contrasts with European ideas of freedom. And we're not talking about the United States yet. We're not talking about all men are created equal. None of that exists yet. One of the biggest concepts of freedom or liberty, as Europeans would call it, in the 15th century, is this idea of Christian liberty. So what does that mean? It means that you have the freedom to choose a religion that you practice so long as your government lets you have it. So I've kind of co-opted the line from Lord of the Rings: one ring to rule them all, one religion is kind of the idea, to rule them all. So what do I mean by that? I mean that by the 15th century, European governments are saying, well, no, we're going to start having an official religion, whether that's Catholic Christianity, Protestant Christianity, whatever. That's the official government sanctioned religion that you can have. And the idea, the reason why European governments start moving to that is because that's how we maintain order. If everybody can choose whatever religion they want, we're going to have massive religious wars like we had in the Middle Ages, and we don't want that anymore. So this is your religion. You can pick that. If you don't, there's going to be problems, and that's how we maintain order. One other critical idea to understand is that more broadly, outside of religion, liberty or rights are not universal, not yet. That idea doesn't exist, that you can have the freedom of speech, assembly, that you're kind of born with these rights. None of that concept exists yet. But if you do have a right in England, let's say, you only have that right because your government gave it to you. So we as English people should be so grateful that we have freedom of speech, let's say. because our government gave that to us, and our government is awesome, and that's why we support it. So that's kind of a confusing idea, maybe, but we'll touch on it a little bit more in chapter 13. No, chapter 2, chapter 3, as we kind of inch closer to the American Revolution. But I do want to make sure that we understand this idea of liberty or freedom not being universal. Is there anybody confused by that? Does anybody want me to repeat that idea? I'll gladly repeat myself. No. Okay. Silence means no. Okay. So let's segue into a bigger discussion about Europe. What's going on in the 14th century, and how do we bring these cultures together? Native peoples, Africa, Europe. So one of the kind of hallmarks of where we're starting in this class, the kind of time frame we're starting, one of the hallmarks of that is European expansion. So what I want to touch on is the kind of how and why of that. So why? Let's start there. Why are Europeans interested in stuff outside of Europe? And kind of the short and quick answer is stuff. They want stuff. More specifically, gold and silk and spices. Okay, so why? Let's start there. Well, silk is something you can only get in China in the 1400s, so it's a expensive thing, and we can make money from that if we sell it. Gold is inherently valuable, is something that human beings have said is valuable, so we want gold. And spices are also something that are hard to acquire in Europe. Certain spices, like cinnamon or mace or even black pepper. So if we can acquire these products, we can make a lot of money off of them. So that implies then that Europeans already knew about them, and they did. Before 1400, you could get a silk bow tie, for instance, but it was really hard to do because you had to import that silk or that bow tie from China. And really the only way you could transport that product was over the Silk Roads. So this is a map of the Silk Roads. So one thing to keep in mind, this is not, like I-75. We're not talking about like an organized paved road. These are trading routes connecting China, India, and then parts of Europe that were predictably easy to travel over and that people knew about. So again, if I wanted that silk bow tie, it's going to take a while, right? I got to get it from all the way over in China back to, let's say, Italy in Europe. So it takes some time, upwards of a year, to get a single piece of clothing. It also costs a lot of money because I have to pay 5 or 6 people to transport that silk bow tie over land or maybe over water. And it's usually more than one person. And depending on where you're traveling, you might have an import tax tacked on to the final cost. So that all takes time, that takes money, that's labor intensive, and it's not always reliable, right? There might be a war happening in part of Persia, so that part of the Silk Road is shut down. So again, Europeans had access to this stuff, but the question around 1400 starts to become, well, how can we get it faster? Or how could we get it cheaper than going over this big land route or through the Indian Ocean and over water? But another thing to keep in mind is Europe is not the first country, the first region or the only region to be interested in stuff outside of their geographic area. Quite frankly, Europeans are kind of the last society to take this leap into long distance trade or travel. As early as 1400, the Chinese Ming Dynasty commissioned a series of treasure ships to travel basically as far west as they could travel, to bring cool stuff to other countries. Zheng He was the captain of these so-called treasure ships or treasure expeditions, that take place over the course of about 40 years or so. Not at one go. It's sort of stop and go, multiple legs to this expedition. But the ships that the Ming Dynasty sends out are absolutely stupendously massive. This is an image of a Ming Dynasty treasure ship next to Christopher Columbus's largest ship, Santa Maria. These treasure ships were, trying to find my place in my notes here, were very big, just so big. I got bullet points in my notes. You'd think I'd have this down by now. These treasure ships are apparently not something I have in my notes here. Well, let me tell you, they're really big. They're 3, 4, 5 times as large as the average kind of sailing ship at the time. Columbus's Santa Maria was about 200 feet long. So multiply that by 5 or 6, and we're talking a huge, massive ship. And there's like 5 of them in these treasure expeditions. So my point here is to say that Europe is not kind of the be-all, end-all of this. They are, again, kind of late to the game of exploration or travel beyond their geographic region.
Professor?
Yeah.
So, like, what made Europe more successful than any other country that tried to? Like,
well, I think we probably should ask, like, what's the measure of success? If you're talking about just straight acquisition of land, there's a lot of components to that on the kind of European end of it.
Well, it seems that like you were talking about, like, obviously those ships in the Ming Dynasty were much larger and probably should have been more successful in acquiring a lot of treasure, obviously, like what they were used for, but it doesn't seem like the Chinese dynasties or anything like that were ever as, I hate to use successful again, but successful as most European countries who employed smaller ships and stuff like that. Is it their location that maybe made it better for them?
Maybe. I mean, I think, what's coming to my head right away is that the treasure expeditions were kind of just a goodwill mission. They're not looking for treasure, although they do bring stuff back from parts of Africa and parts of Europe. Their goal was to kind of basically say, look how amazing our country is. Look at all this cool crap we have. Here, have some silk, have some gold, have some whatever. To that end, when the Portuguese make contact with African groups on the very southern tip of Africa, they're shocked that a lot of these African tribes have silk clothing, and they're saying, "Where on earth did you get this silk?" And they're like, "Dude, where were you 60 years ago? These Chinese people came by and they're like, hey, have some silk." So my kind of, I guess, what springs to my mind right away is that the Chinese and European nations had different goals. Europeans are going to be motivated by, like we said, silk, gold, spices, land acquisition later. The Chinese were just kind of visiting, for lack of a better word, and saying, look at how cool we are. See you later. So I don't know that answers your question, but I guess it is an attempt to say, let's kind of reframe the question. What is success? For the Chinese, these were successful.
Okay, so basically it's just like the Chinese weren't interested in conquest or taking anything from anybody.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
They are interested in kind of flexing their influence a little bit and saying,
talk with a big, talk softly but carry a stick.
Yeah, a little bit. Look at how far we could travel we don't even have to acquire that land because we got there, and we know that we did that already. Plus, China becomes a really insulated country by like the mid 1600s. But that would be a discussion for world history if you want to take a world history class. But let me just double check the time here. Okay, one kind of thought to end on here. So again, the kind of European motive is something we're going to trace towards the end of this chapter and definitely into the next chapter. The kind of motive behind almost every colony that we're going to talk about is, how do we acquire something of value quickly and easily? And that's something we'll touch on more next week. I'm going to pause the lecture here. Couple things first, though. Big reminder. Monday next week, Monday the 13th, we're going to start Monday lectures. So it'll be the same time, same Zoom length, same amount of time, about 50 minutes. I'm just tacking on a second day so we can try to get caught up a little bit more. And for the remainder of the semester, we'll do that Monday and Wednesday lecture. Grading, I'm going to try to get done maybe today, let's say by the end of the week, and we'll go from there. But I do have office hours right after this, separate Zoom link. Jump on there if you have questions about stuff. And other than that, have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you guys on Monday next week. See you guys. Oh,
I have
yeah.
a question.
What's up, Sam?
This isn't like your fault at all, but like the book, when I bought it and like I called Philosophy about it. This was before the weekend, so like I still haven't had a chance to call them again. Like,
Well,
I
hey,
have to
Sam. Sam, I don't want to cut you off, but can we jump over to the office hours in case people need to scoot to, something
Yeah.
else? So jump on over to the link for office hours. Anybody else, if you've got questions, I'll gladly help you there. See you in a second, Sam. Okay.